a working harbour in a slow grey rain. Stonebridge, Maine. 3 minutes past 9 on a November Tuesday morning. The auctioneer's voice was flat and tired because nobody had come to bid on anything that mattered. There was a pallet of cleats. There were 2 outboard motors. There was a fiberglass dinghy with a hole in her hull. And there was the Polaris 9, a 47-foot mini-submarine that had been rusting in slip 11 since the mariner bought the Leon on her in 1992. Eli Reyes was 21 years old. He had been homeless for 8 months. He was wearing the same canvas coat he had been wearing since March, and inside the inner pocket, folded twice, was a $10 bill that he had earned scaling fish for the Friday market. He had slept the night before on a folded tarp in the bait shack at the end of the public pier, and the black harbour cap the dockworkers called sixpence had been asleep on his feet. The air smelled of diesel and wet rope. The gulls were loud and wheeling. The rain came down in a fine, steady curtain that made everything on the pier look as though it had been drawn in pencil and then smudged. When the auctioneer called the lot, an old man in a long camel coat raised one finger, $5. The auctioneer waited. Nobody else moved. And then Eli Reyes, who had slept the night before on a folded tarp in a bait shack, lifted his hand and said, 10. The old man turned his head, slow, and looked at him for a long time. The auctioneer brought the gavel down. The submarine was his. The old man in the camel coat did not leave after the gavel fell. He stood very still on the pier, watching Ellie sign the paperwork with a hand that was shaking from the cold and from something else. Sixpence sat on the bollard, the only witness who seemed to understand that something had changed. In 72 hours, Eli Reyes would understand why his father, a man who never lied to him about anything, had told him only one lie in his entire life. He would understand why an old man on a Maine pier had bid $5 on a piece of scrap, and why that old man had spent the next 2 days trying to buy it back for $50,000. He would understand why the aft bulkhead of a decommissioned survey submarine had been welded shut from the outside by someone who did not want her opened. But to understand the welds, and the cat, and the old man in the camel coat, you have to go back, not 3 weeks, 45 years, to a night in November of 1974, when 4 men met aboard her and only 3 of them walked off. This is the story of the rusted submarine, and what was sealed inside her. The night before the auction, Eli sat in the bait shack at the end of the Stonebridge Pier. It was a tin-roofed structure the harbour let the homeless use unofficially in winter, because the alternative was the cemetery in February, and the harbour master was the kind of man who did not want that on his conscience. Eli had a paraffin lamp, he had a sleeping bag, he had a milk crate full of his father's things, and he had sixpence asleep on his feet. He had been homeless since March, when his mother's 3rd husband told him to go, and his mother did not stop it. He had been working 2 jobs and putting himself through a marine mechanic certificate at the community college. He lost the certificate when he lost the address. He kept the tools, a roll of wrenches that had been his father's, wrapped in oilcloth. His father, Daniel Reyes, had died 5 years ago. A crane at the Portland shipyard slipped a load. Eli was 16. The cigar box and the brown leather logbook came home in a cardboard carton from the shipyard's human resources office, along with Daniel's wedding ring and a half-eaten roll of peppermints. Eli opened the milk crate now, the way he opened it most nights. He lifted out the cigar box first. Inside were a few letters, a photograph of his father standing on a dock, and a roll of peppermints that Eli had never opened and never would. Beneath the cigar box was the logbook, brown leather, cracked along the spine, pages soft at the corners from years of handling. He opened it to the page he had read more than any other page in his life. It was an entry written in 1986, in his father's narrow, careful handwriting, and it said this: "If you ever see the Polaris come up for auction, son, you walk away. Or you bring her up alone, and you bring her up careful. There is a debt aboard her that is not mine to pay and not mine to forgive. But somebody, one day, is going to have to do both." Eli had read this line his entire teenage life and assumed it was a metaphor. His father loved metaphors. His father also loved Caleb Holloway Brent, the man who taught him to weld at 15. And his father had not been the same after Caleb went to prison in 1980, and had been quieter still after Caleb died there in 1986. The auction notice was tacked to the harbourmaster's corkboard on the 28th of October. Eli had read it twice. The hull number was the same, Polaris 9, 1974, single-hull steel survey vessel, sold as is, minimum bid, $5, buyer responsible for tow. He stood in front of the corkboard so long that the harbourmaster came out and asked him if he was all right. He was not all right. He went back to the shack, and he opened the logbook, and he read the line about the Polaris for the first time as a thing his father had meant literally. And he did not sleep that night. He sat with the paraffin lamp burning low, and sixpence's weight warm on his ankles, and he made the only decision a person in his situation could make. He was going to bid. But bidding was the easy part. The harder decision came after. Owning a derelict submarine was one thing. Cutting into a sealed pressure bulkhead, alone, with no permit and no money, was another. He did not want to find anything. He wanted his father to have been wrong, or speaking in metaphor after all. He wanted the Polaris 9 to be empty, so that he could sell her for scrap, take whatever the steel brought, get an apartment, and bury his father a second time, properly, in his own mind. But Daniel Reyes did not lie about anything. Not once, not the easy lies parents tell. Eli had asked, at 13, whether there was a Santa, and his father had taken 20 seconds and then said, no. But the kindness is real, and the kindness is what people are pretending to be when they pretend to be him. That was the kind of man his father was. So the line in the logbook was not a metaphor. And if it was not a metaphor, then there was a debt aboard her, and Eli was now the only person alive who knew where she was, and that the debt existed. He sat on the pier in the rain for an hour after he signed the paperwork. Sixpence sat with him. He did not feel like a man who had just bought a submarine. He felt like a man who had just agreed to something his father had been afraid to agree to, and he was not sure yet whether that made him braver than his father, or only younger. He would cut the welds himself, with borrowed equipment from the harbour welding shop, where he sometimes swept the floor in exchange for coffee. He would do it tonight. The Polaris 9 was 47 feet long, single-hull steel, built in 1974, civilian survey class. She had 2 interior compartments. The forward compartment was the control and crew space, 6 feet by 12, with 4 bunks and 2 consoles. The aft compartment was engineering and ballast, 6 feet by 10, with 2 motors, the battery bank, and a sealed equipment locker. The 2 compartments were separated by a pressure bulkhead with a watertight hatch. The hatch was the welded one, 6 hand-laid welds, each roughly 2 inches long, holding the hatch dogs in place, so the wheel could not be turned. The welds were visibly newer than the surrounding steel. Eli saw this within the first 30 seconds aboard her. The hull steel was 45 years rusted. The weld bead was maybe 40 years old at most, and laid by somebody in a hurry. The spatter pattern said he did not have time to clean the joint. The plan was simple, and it was the only plan he had. First, get the sub towed from slip 11 to slip 26, which was at the back of the harbour and out of sight from the road. The harbour tug operator owed him a favour for a winch repair last summer. Cost would be a 6-pack. Second, borrow the portable oxyacetylene rig from the welding shop. The owner, Hen Larson, would lend it for one night, no questions. Because Hen also knew Daniel Reyes, and that was the kind of harbour this was. Third, cut the 6 welds. Estimated time, 40 minutes if the steel was clean, 2 hours if it was not. Fourth, open the hatch. Document whatever was inside on his prepaid phone camera before he touched it. This last detail was the one that mattered. Eli had the competence to know that whatever was in there, the evidence chain began the moment he photographed it. His father had taught him to listen to a hull. You knock on the steel with the back of a wrench, and you listen for the hollow places. Air sounds different than water, and water sounds different than steel, and steel that has something behind it sounds different than steel that has nothing behind it. Eli had knocked the Polaris 9 the morning of the auction, before the bidding started. The forward compartment had sung like an empty bell. The aft compartment had answered him with the dull, packed sound of a room that was not empty at all. He had the rig. He had the slip. It was 11:47 at night on November 3rd. Sixpence was sitting on the conning tower. Eli lit the torch. The first weld parted at 6 minutes past midnight, and he was no longer 21 years old, and no longer homeless, and no longer anything except a man with a torch and a question. The torch hissed. The bead glowed orange and then white, and then it parted, and a thin curl of smoke rose up, and the smell was old, not the smell of fresh steel cut, but something else, something underneath. Sixpence backed 2 steps along the deck and did not come closer. Eli wiped the slag away with a wire brush and moved to the second weld. Each weld took longer than the last because the bead was uneven and Eli was being careful. He did not want to damage whatever was on the other side of the hatch. He cut the welds in sequence: top, upper right, lower right, bottom, lower left, upper left. The rain had stopped, but the deck was wet, and his knees were wet, and his hands were steady, because his father had taught him that a man with a torch does not get to have unsteady hands. The last weld parted at 1:43 in the morning. The hatch wheel would not turn even after the welds were cut. There was something jammed against it on the inside. Not weight. Pressure. He had to push the hatch inward, 2 inches before the wheel would move, and when he did, there was a soft woof of equalized air, as though the aft compartment had been sealed not just against water, but against time. It opened toward him on stiff hinges. The smell that came out was the smell of paper and machine oil, and 40 years of standing still. He held the flashlight up, and what he saw, in the first sweep of the beam, was a small wooden crate the size of a footlocker, lashed to the deck plates with marine cord, and behind it, the dim shapes of the engineering bay he had been expecting to see. The crate had not been there in 1974. The crate had been put there by somebody after she was decommissioned. He did not enter. He stood in the hatchway, flashlight in hand, and he photographed the compartment from the doorway, twice, before he stepped in. The deck plates were dry, the air was still, the battery bank was dead, and the motors were silent, and the only sound was his own breathing and the slow creak of the hull, adjusting to the open hatch. Sixpence had not come down the ladder. She was sitting at the top of the conning tower hatch, looking down into the forward compartment, her ears forward, her tail still. Eli knelt beside the crate. He did not open it first. On top of the crate, weighted down by a small lead diving weight, was a single sheet of paper in a sealed plastic sleeve. The paper was yellowed. The handwriting was his father's. To whoever opens her, and I hope to God it is you, Eli, because if it is anyone else, I have failed twice. I sealed this hatch myself in June of 1989. I did not put what is in this compartment here. I only added to it. The crate beneath this letter was put aboard her by other men in 1979, and what is in the crate is what they used her to hide. I have spent 10 years deciding whether to bring it ashore, and I cannot decide. And so I am sealing her instead and writing this, and trusting that one day the right person will find her. If you are reading this, son, then you have done what I could not. Open the crate slowly. Photograph everything. Do not go to the Stonebridge police. Do not go to anyone in Stonebridge. Take what you find to the Federal Field Office in Portland and ask for an agent named Linda Marsh, who was a friend of mine and who is a friend of yours whether she remembers it or not. Tell her your father said to call. I am sorry to put this on you. I am sorrier that I did not put it on myself. Dad. June 19, 1989. He had not heard his father's voice in 5 years. He was hearing it now, in his own head, in the flat steel chamber of a submarine that had been waiting for him before he was born. He folded the letter carefully back into its sleeve. Sixpence had come down the ladder and was sitting on the engineering bay floor, perfectly still, watching him. He understood, with a clarity that almost frightened him, that his life had just divided into 2 halves, and the half that was over had been the easier one. He climbed back up the conning tower for air and to think about whether to open the crate tonight or wait for daylight. When he came up onto the deck, he saw the old man. The old man in the camel coat was standing on the public pier, 200 yards across the dark water, under the one working sodium lamp. He was not moving. He was watching slip 26. It was 2:11 in the morning. Eli stood very still on the conning tower, and did not light a cigarette, and did not move. The old man stood for another 40 seconds, and then turned and walked back down the pier toward the parking lot. A car door closed. An engine started. The car did not leave. It stayed parked under the lamp, and the lamp went out. 2 minutes later, the way harbor lamps do on timers, and the parking lot went black, and Eli could not tell any more whether the car was still there. He knew the old man had not come to bid $5 for nothing. He knew the old man knew exactly what was inside her, and had known for 40 years. And he knew that he had until sunrise to decide whether to open the crate alone, in the dark, on a submarine in a slip at the back of a harbor, where the lamps went out at 2:13 in the morning, or to leave it sealed and call a number in Portland that his father had written down before he was born. He went back down the ladder. Eli decided to open the crate. He did it methodically, photographing each item before he removed it. The crate was unlocked. The latches were brass and corroded, but they opened when he pushed them. The lid rose on hinges that had been oiled once, a long time ago, and had not frozen. On the top layer, resting on a sheet of wax paper, was a wax paper-wrapped packet, roughly the size of a hardcover book. He photographed it. He lifted it out. He set it on a clean section of deck plate. He unwrapped it. Inside was a typed cargo manifest, dated November 8, 1974, on the letterhead of a company called North Atlantic Salvage Holdings, LLC. 7 names. $7 figures. A total at the bottom. It was the kind of typed manifest a small office would have produced in 1974. On a Selectric, the letters slightly uneven where the ribbon had been replaced mid-page. At the top, North Atlantic Salvage Holdings, LLC. Distribution schedule, November 8, 1974. Beneath it, in 2 neat columns, A. Vance, $385,000. R. Tolliver, $312,000. J. Brent, $260,000. M. Cosgrove, $210,000. D. Phelan, $135,000. H. Ortiz, $75,000. C. Holloway Brent, $25,500. Total, $1,402,500. At the bottom, in pen, in a different hand from the typing, somebody had written, "Sealed pending second meeting. Do not distribute until Caleb's matter is resolved." Eli sat on the deck plates and stared at the manifest. He knew one of those names. A. Vance. Arthur Vance, who owned Vance Marine Holdings, who had donated the new wing to the Stonebridge Library, who had bid $5 on the pier that morning. He looked at the name, and then he looked at the date, and then he looked at the name again. He opened his father's logbook to an entry he had read 100 times and never understood. It was from March of 1980, and it said, "Caleb is gone. They sent him up for the boatyard fire, and he did not set it. I know who set it. I know why they set it. I cannot prove a single piece of it without proving the rest. And the rest has my name beside it, because I built the cradle she sits in. God forgive me. I am keeping the logbook because one day my boy may need to know that I was a coward." So that was it. That was why his father had been silent. Daniel had been adjacent to whatever the manifest was. He had built the cradle. He had not been a conspirator. He had been a coward, or so he thought. And Caleb's matter was still an open question. Why was his 25,500 so much smaller than the others? Why was the manifest sealed pending Caleb's matter, implying he was alive on November 8, 1974, and they were waiting to see what he did before paying him out? Eli understood now that his father wanted him to take this to the federal field office in Portland. He also understood that he did not yet have enough. A manifest was a piece of paper. A manifest and a logbook entry were 2 pieces of paper. He needed more. He decided not to leave the harbor tonight. He decided to keep cutting deeper into the crate before he called anyone. As he was rewrapping the manifest, he saw a second envelope underneath, smaller, and on it, in the same typed letters, tape, CM 11874. Do not destroy. He had been wrong about what was on the bottom of the crate. There was a recording. Eli took the sealed tin envelope, the size of a paperback, ashore to the welding shop where Hen Larsen had a backroom reel-to-reel that had not been used since 1991. Hen was asleep upstairs. Eli had a key. It was now 4 in the morning of November 4th. The fog was rolling in off the harbor, and the parking lot at the back of the marina was empty, or appeared to be. The tin contained a reel-to-reel magnetic tape, sealed in a tin dated November 8, 1974, between 7:42 p.m. and 8:11 p.m., by the tape counter handwritten on the label. The tape was approximately 29 minutes long. He threaded it onto the reel-to-reel. He put on the headphones. He pressed play. The tape had been recorded by Caleb Holloway Brent. He had brought a portable recorder into the Polaris 9's forward compartment that night, under his jacket. He had recorded the meeting because he had begun to suspect something. The tape was grainy, the voices overlapping, but 4 voices were distinguishable. The first voice was Arthur Vance, 33 years old in 1974, speaking. "We are not killing anybody, Tolliver. I have said this. We are doing the only other thing we can do, which is making sure that if the marshals come, they come for one of us. And the one of us is the one nobody can hang the company on. Caleb cannot read a ledger. Caleb cannot tell them where the money went. Caleb can tell them only that he was paid, and he was paid least." The second voice, older, gravel-voiced. "Ah, Tolliver. And when they ask him why he is the one holding the receipts, Arthur, Vance again. Because we are going to put the receipts in his name. He signed for the equipment, did he not? The boatyard fire is going to take the equipment shed. The equipment was insured by Caleb's company on paper, because Caleb's company is the one we set up for him last spring. When the shed burns, the insurance pays out, and the insurance pays to Caleb's company, and Caleb's company is in Caleb's name, and Caleb is the only one whose signature is on anything. We pay him his share. He is the man who profited. We are simply men he worked for." A fourth voice, a younger voice, hesitant. This was Daniel Reyes, 26 years old. Arthur, he has a kid. Vance, sharp, then he should not have signed." There was a long silence on the tape. Then the sound of a chair scraping. Then Daniel Reyes's voice, again softer. "I want out, Vance. Daniel, you built her. You built the cradle. You built the housing. You are out when we tell you that you are out." The remaining minutes were the sound of the meeting ending, and footsteps, and a door closing, and finally the soft click of the recorder being switched off. Eli sat in the back room of the welding shop, with the headphones on and his hands flat on the table. He thought of a letter his father had written to himself, undated, found in the cigar box. He had read it many times. He had never understood it until now. "I did not set the fire. I did not sign the papers in Caleb's name. I built her, and that is the part I cannot give back. Every weld I laid on her was a weld I knew was holding something I did not want to be holding. The day they sealed the bulkhead, I knew what they were sealing in. I should have run to the marshals that night. I went home and held my boy instead. He was 9 months old. I told myself I would tell them when he was older. I did not. So that was his father's actual role, builder of the sub. Not a conspirator in the fire or the framing, but complicit in his silence." Eli now understood the exact shape of his father's guilt. He copied the tape to his phone using a cable Hen had in a drawer. He put the original tin back in the wax paper. He returned to the sub. He had not slept in 26 hours. When he climbed back down into the aft compartment, he saw that Sixpence was sitting on top of the crate, ears flat, looking not at Eli, but at the open hatchway behind him. Eli turned. The hatchway was empty, but somebody had been on the deck above. There were wet footprints, fresh, leading from the conning tower hatch to the engineering hatch and stopping there. Whoever it was, they had been in the forward compartment while Eli was ashore. He was no longer alone with her. Eli did not run. He did what his father would have done. He moved the crate. He hauled it up out of the aft compartment, with effort, and he carried it on a hand truck through the fog to Hen Larsen's backroom safe, which Hen let him use when Eli asked. It was now 6 in the morning. The harbor was starting to wake up. He opened the crate again under the safe light. Beneath the wax paper and the tin there was a book. A leather-bound ledger, the kind a small business kept in 1974. Green pebbled cover, ribbon bookmark, blank ruled pages. Inside, in 3 different hands, across 5 years, every cash drop made by North Atlantic Salvage Holdings between November of 1974 and April of 1979. Weekly entries. Dollar amounts ranging from $1,200 to $14,000. Each entry had a payee initial and a location code. Caleb Holloway Brent's initials appeared in the November 8, 1974 entry, receiving $25,500, and never again. Daniel Reyes's initials appeared only twice, both in 1974, once receiving $4,000 marked boat cradle materials, and once receiving $1,800 marked labor, final. Arthur Vance's initials appeared on nearly every entry, on the paying side, until the final entry. The final entry read, April 11, 1979. AV, closure, RT, closure, JB, closure, MC, closure, HO, closure, Polaris sealed. He goes down for it. We do not speak again. AV. There was a page, torn from the cigar box, that had been tucked into the back of the logbook. It was written by Daniel in November of 1986, 3 months after Caleb died in prison. Caleb died on the 4th of August. I read it in the paper. I did not go to the funeral because I am a coward, and because if I had gone, I do not know what I would have said. I went to the Polaris instead. She is still in slip. 11. The lien is at the marina. Nobody will buy her. I climbed aboard and I sat in the forward compartment for 2 hours, and I did not cry. I do not know yet what I am going to do. I know I am not going to do nothing, Daniel. The ledger closed the full criminal pattern. 5 years of organized fraud, the conspiracy laundered through a shell company, all the payouts documented in Vance's own handwriting. Caleb's $25,500 was now visible for what it was. A one-time payment to the man they were about to frame, calculated to make him look guilty if anyone ever audited the books. But the ledger opened new questions too. Where was the rest of the money? The total over 5 years was millions. And was Arthur Vance still moving money the same way? Eli photographed every page of the ledger. He called the Federal Field Office in Portland from Hen's backroom phone, not yet to give his name, just to confirm that Linda Marsh was still an active agent. The receptionist said she was. He hung up. He went back to the sub to retrieve the last item from the crate, which he had not yet opened. When he returned to the sub at 7:15 in the morning, the slip was no longer empty in the way he had left it. There was a black SUV in the marina parking lot now. The harbor master was talking to 2 men in jackets that said nothing on the front and nothing on the back, which was how Eli knew they were not from the harbor. The men were pointing at slip 26. He had 10 minutes, maybe less. There was one more thing in the crate. Eli boarded the sub at speed. He had left the last item in the crate, which was now back in Hen's safe. But he had taken one thing with him this morning, a smaller cigar box, the size of a paperback, that had been nested inside the larger crate, separately wrapped, with his name written on the lid in his father's handwriting. Eli. He opened it in the forward compartment, on the navigator's table, with the early light coming through the conning tower hatch in a thin grey column. Inside were 2 items. A folded letter, 4 pages, dated June 19, 1989, the same date as the note on top of the crate, meaning his father had written both letters the same day, the day he sealed her. And a photograph. The photograph was a black and white print, 4 inches by 5. 3 men on the deck of the Polaris 9, sometime in late 1974 by the look of their coats. The man on the left was Arthur Vance, recognizable as a much younger version of the old man in the camel coat. The man in the middle was Caleb Holloway Brent. Eli had only seen him in one other photograph, the one in his father's wallet. Caleb was laughing at something. The man on the right was Daniel Reyes, 26 years old, not laughing, looking at Caleb. On the back of the photograph, in Daniel's handwriting, The week before. He did not know. Neither did I. Eli unfolded the first page of the 4-page letter. His father's handwriting, steady, careful, the letters small. Eli. If you are the one who has opened her, then you are older now than I was when I built her. And I have to tell you what I should have told you in person when I was alive. I built her in 1973. I was 25. Arthur Vance paid me $4,000 for the cradle and the rigging, and another $1,800 for the labor. And I knew by the time I cashed the second check that the money was not coming from a salvage company. I knew. And I did not ask, because $4,000 in 1973 was a kitchen and a crib and a heater that worked. Your mother was pregnant with you. I have spent my whole life telling myself that the cradle I built for her and the cradle I built for you were not paid for by the same money. They were. They were the same money. I am sorry. The remaining 3 pages he did not read yet. He folded the letter and the photograph into his coat. He closed the conning tower hatch behind him as he climbed out. He saw Vance on the pier. He saw the 2 men in the unmarked jackets in the parking lot. He understood the geometry. He went ashore. The old man stopped at the end of slip 26. He did not step onto the float. He had not stepped onto the Polaris 9 in 40 years, and he was not going to step onto her now. He waited for Eli to come to him. Sixpence sat on the bollard between them, tail wrapped neatly around her paws, looking at the old man as if she had been waiting for him for some time. Before we go any further, before the old man on the pier opens his mouth and tells Eli Reyes what he has come to say, if you have come this far with us, into the fog, and into the welded compartment, and into the handwriting of a man who has been gone 5 years, then stay. Subscribe if you mean to. There is a tape, and there is a letter, and there is a name on a manifest that has not yet been spoken aloud, and you have not yet seen the trap close. Stay with us. If you were Eli, standing on that pier with the evidence in your coat and the men in the parking lot, would you walk to the harbor office and call the agent in Portland, or would you let the old man speak first? Vance spoke first. He was calm. He had had 40 years to prepare this conversation, and one of his sentences came out as though he had rehearsed it in front of a mirror. I will give you $50,000 for the contents of that submarine, Mr. Reyes, and another $50,000 for your silence, and I will do it in cash. Today, by 3 this afternoon. I know your situation. I know where you sleep. I am offering you, in a single conversation, more money than your father made in 5 years of his life. I am asking you to walk away from her, the way he asked you to. Eli did not answer right away. He looked at Vance and he understood, with the noticing competence his father trained into him, several things at once. He saw that Vance was not afraid of him. He saw that Vance was afraid of the men in the parking lot, and that the men in the parking lot were not Vance's men. He saw that Vance had come alone to the pier because Vance had not yet decided whether to negotiate or to disappear. He saw, in the slight tremor in the old man's left hand, that Vance was 78 years old, and that whatever the Polaris 9 contained, it had eaten Vance from the inside for 40 years, the way it had eaten his father. Only Vance had been the one who built the meal. Vance, sensing the silence, talked longer than he should. This was the moment the bigger truth came ashore. You think I do not know what is on her. I know what is on her. I put it on her. I sealed her in April of 1979, with my own hands and the hands of Tolliver, who is dead, and Cosgrove, who is dead, and Phelan, who is dead. Ortiz drowned in 1981, and Brent was my partner, Mr. Reyes, my business partner, and your father's brother by marriage, if you did not know that. And yes, he was Caleb's brother too, and yes, that is why we picked Caleb. Because Brent told us Caleb could not read a ledger, and Brent died in his sleep in 1996, thinking he had gotten away with it. I am the only one left, Mr. Reyes, and I am the only one who knows that the money I have been moving, the money I have been giving to the library and to the museum, and to the Children's Hospital in Portland, the money everyone in this harbor town thinks is the money that makes me a good man. That money has been the same money for 45 years. I have been laundering it through every donation I make. I have been emptying out the original principal, dollar by giving it away. I am not finished. I have approximately $1,200,000 left. I had planned to be finished by the time I died. I am asking you, son, to let me finish. Eli now understood the full shape, the original fraud. The framing of Caleb, the 4 decades of laundering through legitimate philanthropy, and the fact that Vance had been racing his own death to wash the last of the money. He said nothing. He nodded slowly, as though considering. He asked for the rest of the day to think. Vance agreed, visibly relieved. Vance did not yet know that Eli had already photographed the manifest, copied the tape, photographed every page of the ledger, and had the 4-page letter in his coat. Eli was no longer a homeless 21-year-old. He was his father's son, who had been taught how to listen for hollow places. As Vance walked back up the pier, the 2 men in the unmarked jackets did not approach Vance. They did not look at him. They looked at Eli. One of them lifted a phone to his ear and spoke briefly, and then both of them got into the SUV, and the SUV did not leave. It moved to a different spot in the parking lot. A better spot to watch from. Eli walked to Hen Larson's welding shop. He went in the back door. He did not turn on a light. He thought it through the way his father had taught him to think through a tide chart. If the men in the SUV worked for Vance, they would have approached Vance on the pier. They had not. If they worked for the harbor or the marshals, they would have approached Ellie on the pier. They had not. So they worked for someone who knew about the Polaris 9, and knew about Eli, and knew about Vance, and was watching all 3. There were 2 possibilities. 1, a third party, a creditor, or a buyer, or an old enemy of Vance's, who had been waiting 40 years for the Polaris 9 to be opened by anyone who was not Vance. 2, federal agents who were not Linda Marsh, and who had been quietly watching Vance for months or years, and who had just watched a homeless 21-year-old buy the centerpiece of their investigation for $10. He did not know which it was. He had to find out before he could call Marsh, because if it was the second, then calling her saved him. And if it was the first, then calling her may be exactly the wrong move, because the wrong people may be listening. Sixpence came in through the back door of the shop 10 minutes after he did, which she had never done before, because she did not like the smell of the shop. She walked the length of the shop, and sat under the workbench, and looked at the back door, and Eli understood that she had followed somebody who was following him. He went out the front of the shop. He walked 2 blocks, not toward the pier, toward the public library, which had free internet and a back window onto an alley. He sat at a terminal. He searched 3 names: Arthur Vance, Linda Marsh, North Atlantic Salvage Holdings. Arthur Vance was clean. A 2-page profile in the local paper from 2019 about his philanthropy. Linda Marsh was still listed on the Federal Field Office Portland directory. Senior Special Agent. 27 years in the Bureau. North Atlantic Salvage Holdings was a small notice from the Maine Secretary of State's office. The LLC was administratively dissolved in 1981, but there was a 2022 federal indictment, sealed in part, naming several successor entities of dissolved 1970s shell companies operating in coastal Maine. The press release did not name Vance, but the language fit. The investigation was already running. Eli was, by accident, the witness who had just walked out of slip. 26 with the entire archive. He logged out of the terminal. He went out the back window of the library into the alley. The SUV was parked at the mouth of the alley. He did not run. He walked the other way, toward the harbor, and he understood, with the kind of cold clarity his father would have called bad weather thinking, that he had 2 hours before he was either in custody or in trouble. And he did not yet know which kind of custody and which kind of trouble. He needed a plan. He could not go to the Federal Field Office in Portland. The 2-hour drive on Route 1 was too exposed. If the men in the SUV were Bureau, he would be picked up before he got there. If they were not, he would be picked up before he got there. Either way, he was picked up. He needed to bring Linda Marsh to him on neutral ground, in public, in daylight, in front of witnesses, with the evidence in a place she controlled, before anyone else could intercept it. He needed Arthur Vance to be there too, Because Vance's confession on the pier was currently a witness statement of one homeless man against the most respected philanthropist in town. And that was not enough. He had in his coat the 4-page letter from his father. He had on his phone the tape and the photographs of the ledger and the manifest. He had, in Hen Larson's safe, the originals. He needed a fourth thing. He needed to put Vance in a position where Vance confessed again, in daylight, to someone other than Eli, in a place where Eli could capture it without it being entrapment. The plan came together in pieces. Eli called Linda Marsh's direct line at the Federal Field Office. From a payphone outside the harbor master's office, he gave his name, his location, his father's name. He said one sentence: "I have the Polaris 9, and I have a tape from November 1974, and Arthur Vance is going to be at the Stonebridge Harbor public meeting tonight at 7, and I am going to be there too. And if you are not there too, I do not know what is going to happen to either of us." The Stonebridge Harbor public meeting was a real event held the first Wednesday of every month. Tonight was the first Wednesday. Vance attended every meeting. He sat in the third row. He had not missed one in 15 years. Eli had known this since he started sleeping in the bait shack, because the meeting was in the same building, and the meeting handed out free coffee. At the meeting, Eli would give the harbor master a sealed envelope addressed to the Federal Field Office, containing copies of the manifest, the ledger, and a transcript of the tape. The harbor master was a witness. Vance would be in the room. Eli would then stand up during the public comment period, and in front of the room, ask Vance one question. Whatever Vance said, confess, deny, or refuse, happened in front of 40 witnesses, and the harbor master had the envelope, and the federal agent he hoped was there had eyes on it. It was not a perfect plan. His father had taught him that a perfect plan was the plan of a man who did not understand the weather. It was a plan that put the truth in a room and made it impossible to seal the truth back up again. It put the evidence in 3 places at once. It made him, finally, useless to kill, because killing him would no longer remove the evidence. It would only confirm it. He bought a cup of coffee from the gas station across from the harbor office at 6:40 in the evening. He drank it on the sidewalk in the dark. Sixpence sat on his boot. At 6:58, he walked across the parking lot and into the meeting hall, and he saw, in the back row, a woman in her late 50s, in a grey coat, who did not look like she belonged at a harbor meeting, and who looked at him for 2 seconds and then looked away. He sat down in the second row, 1 row in front of Arthur Vance, and at 7 o'clock the harbor master called the meeting to order, and Eli Reyes opened the envelope his father had been keeping for him since 1989. The agenda was routine: slip fees, a proposed dredging contract, a complaint about gulls. Vance spoke once on the dredging contract in favor. His voice was steady. He did not look at Eli. Public comment opened at 7:31. Eli stood. "My name is Eli Reyes. My father was Daniel Reyes, who built the Polaris 9 in 1973. On Tuesday morning I bought the Polaris 9 at this mariner's auction for $10. On Tuesday night I opened her. There was a sealed crate aboard her containing a 1974 cargo manifest, a leather-bound ledger covering 5 years of cash payments, a magnetic tape from November the 8th of 1974, and a letter from my father, dated June of 1989. The manifest lists 7 names. One of them was framed for a fire he did not set. One of them is sitting in the third row of this meeting. I am asking him, in front of all of you, one question." The room was silent. The harbor master had the envelope in his hand. The woman in the grey coat in the back row had not moved. Eli turned to Vance. "Mr. Vance, on the pier this morning at 7:22, you told me that the money you have been donating to the Stonebridge Library and to the Harbor Museum and to the Children's Hospital in Portland has, for 45 years, been the principal of a 1974 fraud that you and 6 other men committed, and for which my father's friend, Caleb Holloway Brent, went to prison and died. You told me that you had about $1,200,000 of that principal still to launder, and you offered me $100,000 of it to be quiet. I am asking you, in this room, in front of these neighbors, whether what you said to me this morning is true." Vance had 3 choices: Deny, and Eli plays the tape from the pier, which he recorded on his phone, legal in Maine, a one-party consent state. Refuse, and the evidence speaks for itself. Confirm, and the room hears it. Vance was 78 years old. He had been carrying this for 45 years. He chose the third. It is true. I am sorry. I am very, very sorry. I will say it again to whoever needs to hear it. I will say it to a court. I will say it to Caleb's son. I have been waiting 40 years for somebody to ask me that question, in a room I could not walk out of. The room did not react the way a room reacts in a movie. The room reacted the way a real small harbor town reacts to something it has half suspected for a generation. With silence. The harbor master slowly walked the envelope to the woman in the grey coat in the back row. She stood up. She introduced herself. Linda Marsh. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Portland Field Office. Mr. Vance, will you come with me, please? Eli walked home that night. Back to the bait shack. In the cold. In the dark. With sixpence walking beside him through the wet streets. He sat on the floor with the paraffin lamp burning, and he took out the 4-page letter, and he read the rest of it for the first time. I am writing this on the deck of her on a Sunday afternoon. I have just finished welding the bulkhead. The welds are bad. I am not a good welder, and I have never been one. And you will see that when you open her. The beads are uneven and the spatter is everywhere. And I want you to know that the badness of the welds is not because I was careless. The badness of the welds is because my hands were shaking. And they were shaking because I knew what I was sealing in, and I knew I was sealing it in for you to find, I thought, for a long time about destroying what is in this crate. I sat with it in my truck for 2 nights in 1986, after Caleb died. I drove out to the bridge at South Cove, and I stopped on the shoulder, and I sat for an hour with the crate in the bed of the truck, and I could not throw it over. I could not, Eli. The reason I could not is the reason I am writing this letter. Caleb had a son. His name is Marcus. He was 11 years old when his father went to prison, and 17 when his father died. He grew up believing his father was a man who burned down a boatyard for the insurance money, because that is what the state of Maine told him in a courtroom. And that is what the newspapers told him on a front page, and that is what every neighbor in this town told him for the rest of his childhood. He grew up believing his father was a worse man than his father was. I have watched him from a distance for 13 years. He drives a school bus now, in the next county, and he is a good man, and he is a good man with a wound that I put in him by being a coward. I cannot give Caleb back his life. I cannot give Marcus back his father. I can give Marcus one thing, which is the truth, and I cannot give it to him myself, because I am too small to carry it to him, and because if I bring it forward in 1989, I will go to prison too, and you will lose your father at 9 years old instead of 16, and your mother will lose her husband, and I have decided, God forgive me, that I am going to keep being your father for as long as I can, and that one day when I am gone, I will give the truth to you, and let you decide what to do with it. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to give it to Marcus. Give him the manifest. Give him the tape. Give him the ledger, if you can stand to. Tell him his father was a good man. Tell him my name. Tell him I was the one who built the cradle, and the one who said nothing, and the one who, 15 years late, sealed her with his own bad welds because at the very least, when somebody finally opened her, the truth would be inside. And not silt, and not water, and not nothing. I love you, son. I am sorry I had to leave this to you. I would have done it myself if I had been a braver man, and I was not. Dad. He folds the letter. He sits on the floor of the bait shack with the paraffin lamp burning and the cat asleep on his thigh, and he does not cry. He has not cried in 5 years. He sits very still, and he listens to the harbor breathing outside the tin walls. And he understands, at 21, that his father was a small and frightened man who loved him, and that those two things are not in contradiction, and that this is what it is to be a son. The next morning Eli drove, borrowing Hen Larson's truck, to the next county to a school bus depot at 5:30 in the morning, because that was when the buses were prepped. He waited by the chain-link fence. A man in his 50s in a navy windbreaker came out of the office with a clipboard. Eli said, "Mr. Holloway Brent." The man stopped. He looked at Eli for a long time, the way Vance had looked at him on the pier, only without the fear. He said, "You have a face I know from somewhere." Eli said, "My father was Daniel Reyes." Marcus Holloway Brent put the clipboard down on a folding chair, and he said, "Oh." And then he said, "Oh, son." Eli gave him the letter. He gave him the photograph. He gave him copies of the manifest and the ledger and the tape. He said, "My father said your father was a good man, and that he was sorry, and that he wanted you to know." Marcus held the letter in both hands, and he did not open it yet. He looked at the photograph for a long time. He said, "My father is laughing in this picture." Eli said, "Yes, sir." Marcus said, "I do not have any pictures of him laughing." And then he sat down on the folding chair, slowly, and he began to read. Arthur Vance was indicted in February on 27 counts of mail fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. He pleaded guilty to all of them. He is 79 years old, and he will not survive his sentence. And he has said publicly that he does not expect to. He has asked the court to apply whatever remains of his estate, after restitution, to a fund in Caleb Holloway Brent's name for the families of the wrongfully convicted in the state of Maine. Caleb Holloway Brent was posthumously exonerated by the Maine Innocence Project in March. The exoneration ceremony was held at the State House in Augusta. Marcus Holloway Brent spoke for 2 minutes. He said his father had been a man who taught him to fish, and who taught him to be patient, and who taught him to forgive even when forgiveness was unearned, and that he was going to try to be his father's son. The federal finder's reward for assistance in the recovery of laundered assets came to Eli Reyes in April. A check for $38,000, which was not life-changing money in the way that $100,000 from Vance would have been life-changing money, but which was enough. Eli used part of it to lease slip 26, where the Polaris 9 still sits, and the back corner workshop of Hen Larson's welding shop, which Hen had been wanting to retire from anyway. He cleaned the Polaris 9 up over the summer. He did not restore her. He left the bulkhead the way his father had welded it, bad beads and all, and he cut a small viewing window in the side of the aft compartment, plexiglass and a brass plate, so visitors could see in. He turned her into a small marine history exhibit, free to walk through, open weekends from May to October, with a brass plaque on the conning tower that reads only, Polaris 9, built 1973 by Daniel Reyes, opened 2024 by his son. He finished the Marine Mechanics certificate at the community college in December. He is no longer homeless. He rents a one-room above the harbour master's office. Sixpence still sleeps on his feet. Marcus Holloway Brent comes to the harbour twice a month. They do not always speak. Sometimes Marcus sits on the conning tower for an hour and looks at the water and goes home. Eli Reyes is 22 years old now. He has a slip and a shop and a cat and a certificate and a friend who is 30 years older than he is and who comes to sit on a submarine. He does not have his father. He does not have, exactly, the life he thought he was going to have at 21. He has, instead, the life his father was not able to have, which was the life of a man who told the truth on time. The canvas coat is hanging on a peg in the workshop now. He does not wear it anymore. He has a wool one for the harbour. The canvas coat is the coat he wore on the morning of November the 3rd, and he keeps it because it is the coat his father bought him for his 16th birthday, 3 weeks before the crane slipped at the Portland shipyard. In the inner pocket of the canvas coat, where it has been since the morning of the auction, is a folded $10 bill. He took the bill out of the mariner's till after he signed the paperwork, and he asked the auctioneer if he could have it back as a keepsake. And the auctioneer, who had known Daniel Reyes, said yes. He has not spent it. He will not. Sometimes, on Sunday afternoons, when the exhibit is closed and the harbour is quiet and Sixpence is asleep on the conning tower, he goes to the coat and he takes the bill out, and he unfolds it and he holds it flat on the workbench under the lamp. It is a 1995 Series 10. It is creased twice. There is a small rust mark on the corner of it from where he carried it in his pocket the night he cut the welds. He looks at it for a minute or two, and then he folds it again the way it was folded, and he puts it back in the pocket of the coat on the peg, and he turns off the lamp. $10 bought a submarine. The submarine carried a debt. The debt belonged to a man who could not pay it. The man's son paid it. That is the whole story, and Eli Reyes is, finally, the man who paid it.